There's a moment most people scroll straight past in the very first episode of Season 1. Rick Grimes is in a hospital corridor, bare feet on linoleum, the world already wrong around him, and he moves toward the light at the end of the hall. Behind him, the door to his room stands open. Nobody closed it when they left. Nobody thought to. The world ended, and that door just stayed open. One rectangle of ordinary space against the collapsed extraordinary of everything around it. It's a background detail, set dressing maybe, the kind of thing that fills a frame while the important things happen in the foreground. Except the show keeps doing it. Open doors, in the background, in the margins, in the edges of scenes that are about something else. And the more I looked for it in the archive, the harder it became to explain away. So here's what I want to sit with tonight. What if Rick Grimes wasn't fighting the world, but trying, the whole time, to keep a door open inside it? There's something in Season 1 most people forgot about, and it's hiding in the first 5 minutes of the entire show. The hospital room door. I want to start there because I think it's the image the show never fully explained and never needed to. It just placed it in the frame and trusted that the right kind of watching would eventually find it. Rick wakes alone. The room is dim. The flowers on the bedside table have been dead long enough to have dried rather than wilted. And the corridor outside is the specific silence of a place that used to be full of a particular kind of ordered human movement, and is now full of nothing. He reaches for the glass of water first. Habit, the body running its before-world program without consulting the situation. Then he gets up. Then he moves toward the door. The door is open. It was open when he woke up. There's no indication of when it was last touched. No evidence of whether someone left in a hurry, or left carefully, or simply left, and the question of whether to close it never came up. The world ended and this door just stayed as it was. Open, functional, neither welcoming nor warning, simply present as a threshold that hasn't been asked to be anything yet. Rick walks through it, into the corridor, into the show, into everything that follows. Here's the detail I want to plant quietly, because it pays off later. He doesn't look back at it. He moves through the door and his attention goes immediately forward, to the corridor, to the light at the far end, to the problem of understanding what he's inside. The open door behind him is already background, already the kind of thing you don't think about because the thing in front of you requires everything. The show uses open doors in Rick's key scenes with a consistency that I find genuinely striking once you're looking for it. Not always dramatically, not always foregrounded, often exactly the way they appear in this opening scene. As background, as threshold, as the space between where a character is and where they're about to go, left open by habit or urgency, or the simple fact that in this world, closing things behind you is a luxury that survival rarely affords. What if the show was using doors to track something about Rick that nobody framed as a pattern? Not his choices about violence or mercy, not his evolving relationship with leadership, not the specific moral crossings the arc is famous for, but something underneath all of those. The question of whether he believed at any given point that the next room might be better than the one he was in, that there was somewhere worth going, that a door was worth leaving open. I'm not ready to call it a thesis yet. The archive rarely gives you the thesis cleanly. It gives you the detail, and the detail gives you the question, and then you follow the question. The door behind Rick still open. The corridor ahead of him, unknown. File that image away. We'll come back to it. The aerial shot of Atlanta in Season 1's second episode is one of the show's most deliberate images, and I want to spend some time with what it's doing before we move to the pattern it reveals. Rick rides toward Atlanta on horseback, specifically on horseback, which is already meaningful. already a choice that positions him as someone arriving at a modern city from a different era's vocabulary, someone for whom the vehicle of the old world isn't available, and who has had to improvise a different kind of forward motion. From above, from the aerial perspective the show chooses, the city looks intact. The skyline is the skyline. The geometry of the place, the streets, the towers, the accumulated physical argument that civilization was here and built something, is all present and accounted for. It looks from a sufficient distance like somewhere you'd want to go, and then Rick rides into the streets, and the silence takes on a different quality, and the city reveals itself as the locked room it has become. Everyone who might have helped has gone or died. The doors that should have been open are barricaded, or jammed, or standing in front of nothing useful. And the door Rick needed Atlanta to be. The door marked rescue. The door marked reunion. The door marked the world is managing this, and someone is in charge. Never existed. He arrived at the right address and the building was already something else. There's something in this pattern worth naming clearly. Every community Rick enters across the series has a door, literal or figurative, that opens to him and eventually closes. Herschel's farm opens through the accident of Carl's injury and closes in fire and walkers and the specific violence of a world that was always going to reach the farm, whether the farm was ready for it or not. The prison opens through Rick's assessment of its defensibility and closes through the governor's determined refusal to leave it standing. Alexandria opens. Literally, the gate swings open after a period of assessment, and the Alexandrians have clearly opened it to other survivors before, and closes through the accumulated weight of everything the world sends toward it. And in each case, Rick rides toward the door with the same quality of forward motion. A man who believes, or who needs to believe, that the next place will be different. Not naively. He's not unaware of how the previous doors ended. He carries that knowledge with him, visibly, in the specific gravity the show builds into his bearing across the middle seasons. But he goes anyway. He keeps going toward the next door, the next community, the next attempt at the thing Carl described in his letter, and Rick keeps trying to build in Carl's name. Is Rick defined by where he's going, or by his refusal to stop believing somewhere is worth going to? I've been sitting with that question for a while, and I think the honest answer is the refusal. The going is almost secondary. What defines Rick, what the show keeps returning to as the thing that makes him both essential and costly, is the specific quality of his forward motion. The belief that the door ahead is worth reaching even when the door behind just closed on something he loved. Atlanta's streets, open and silent in those first season 1 episodes, are a particular kind of door. The kind that is neither locked nor welcoming but simply ajar. Not an invitation, not a barrier, just the world as it found itself after the ending, before anyone had decided what to do with the space. Rick rides through it. He doesn't slow down at the threshold. The threshold is just the threshold. And that quality, the not slowing down, the maintained forward motion, the refusal to treat the space between here and there as a destination in itself, is what's going to cost the people who follow him. That's where the thread leads next, and it's not a comfortable place to go, but it's where we need to go. The expression fandom calls Grimes face is a piece of community shorthand that I find genuinely useful for archival purposes, and I want to take it seriously before we follow what it means. It's the expression Rick Grimes makes, first most clearly, in Season 2 when he's killed Shane. When he has made a decision the world forced on him and processed the cost of it, and arrived at the other side of the processing without resolution. Not peace, not satisfaction, Not grief in the active, expressive sense the show sometimes gives its characters. Something more like the face a person makes when they've added a number to a column that keeps getting longer and the column doesn't stop. The expression of someone doing the arithmetic of survival and not looking away from the total. Here's what I find interesting about it. It's an archival pattern. Every major escalation in Rick's arc is preceded by a closed door. Not figuratively, in the specific sense that something that should have been possible, some option that should have remained available, closes before Rick's escalation becomes necessary. Shane's death is preceded by the closing of the possibility that Shane and Rick can coexist, that the before-world friendship can survive the afterworld divergence of their readings of what survival requires. Herschel's death closes the possibility that the negotiating mode can hold against a specific kind of opponent. Glenn's death in Season 7 closes a door that had been open since the very early seasons. The possibility that the people Rick loves most are protected by his effectiveness rather than endangered by his associations. The Grimes face comes after each closing. It's the face of someone who checked the door and found it locked. And yet, and this is the thing that makes the pattern interesting rather than merely sad, the open door persists. There's something in Rick that the closed doors don't close. Something that keeps finding the next threshold, keeps orienting toward the next possible room, keeps believing that the door ahead hasn't necessarily been locked by the fate of the one behind. It's not optimism in the ordinary sense, it's something more structural than optimism. Something that the show seems to suggest is baked into who Rick is at a level below the decisions, below the crossings, below the accumulated Grimes face arithmetic. Was Rick's real fight never against the villains, or the external threats, or the mechanics of survival in the apocalypse? The evidence the archive keeps giving me suggests something different. Something that the title of this video names, but that I want to approach carefully, because naming it too quickly closes it off. What if the real contest, the one that runs underneath every confrontation with every antagonist across every season, was between Rick and a world that kept closing the doors he needed to stay open? Not closing them maliciously, not as a coordinated campaign, just in a way that things close in this world, because someone decided to use force rather than negotiation, because a community's defences proved insufficient, because the timing was wrong by a fraction, and the fraction was everything. The world doesn't hate Rick. The world doesn't know he exists. The doors close because that's what doors do in a world that stopped maintaining them, and Rick keeps standing at the next one. From the door's perspective, if we allow ourselves that thought experiment for a moment, the pattern might look different. Door opened, person walked through. Door left open. Person didn't look back. The door is just a door. It doesn't know what it marked. It doesn't know what it cost. It stayed open because nobody closed it, and that's both everything and nothing, depending on which side of it you're standing on. The question the door can't answer, and the question the show has been building towards since that hospital corridor. What happens when Rick runs out of doors? Before we follow the evidence into the pattern it's building, I want to stop and spend time with the specific thing Rick was fighting for. Not in the abstract, not survival or community or any of the larger vocabulary the show has developed for what its characters want. I mean specifically, granularly. The image he was walking toward. There's a scene in Season 4, after the prison falls, that the archive keeps returning me to as the most precise image of this. Rick and Carl on the road with nothing, literally nothing, having escaped with what they were wearing when the attack came. They find a house. They eat dog food from a can because it's what's available. And Rick talks to Carl about the future. not the immediate tactical future, not where they're going next or whether the road is clear or what they do if another group finds them. The actual future. The version of what comes next in which this moment, this road, this dog food from a can is part of a story that turns out to mean something. He talks to Carl with the specific warmth and the specific steadiness of a man who understands that his son needs the destination to exist even more than either of them needs the road to be survivable, and who is providing the destination because providing it is the most essential thing he can do right now. The open door in this scene is the one Rick is narrating. He's describing a future that doesn't have a physical threshold yet, a door that doesn't exist in any building they've reached, that they're walking toward across country on a road that's been stripped of everything it used to mean. He's keeping it open through the act of describing it, through the specific insistence of a man who will not, in this moment, let the door close. Here's the thing I want to sit with. Was Rick's resilience, the famous quality, the thing that makes him the show's centre of gravity across 13 seasons, genuine faith or the performance of faith that leadership required? Because those are different things, and the difference matters for how you read the arc. Genuine faith would mean Rick actually believed at each stage that the door ahead was real, that the farm was going to work, that the prison was going to hold, that Alexandria was going to be the thing Carl described, that the future he was narrating to Carl on that road was a real future they were walking toward. Performance of faith would mean Rick understood, at some level, that the door might not be there, that the future was more uncertain than the narration allowed, but provided the narration anyway because the people behind him needed someone who could hold the belief. Because the group required a person at the front who could look like they knew where the door was, and Rick had become that person, and the performance was the leadership, and the leadership was the performance, and there wasn't a clean line between them. I think, cautiously, because the archive doesn't fully resolve this, that it was both. That Rick started with genuine faith and accumulated the performance over time, and that the performance and the faith eventually became indistinguishable, even to him. That by the time Carl is dying in season 8, and Rick is trying to honour the letter while the letter is still being written, Rick may not have been able to tell you, if you'd asked, whether the door he was walking toward was a place he believed in, or a direction he'd chosen to maintain because stopping would cost more than he could pay. What Rick doesn't say to Carl, when Carl stops responding, when the distance between them becomes the specific distance of a child growing old enough to see through the narration, and a father holding the narration together anyway, is louder than most of what gets said between them. The door between them, the particular silence of a parent who is given everything they have and is still being asked for more. That silence is where the fight lives, I think. Not in the confrontations with antagonists, in the moments between them, when Rick is alone with the door and the question of whether it's still open. Negan Smith walks out of the tree line in the season 7 premiere, and the show stages it with the specific quality of an event that's been earned by 2 seasons of build-up. The slow revelation of his scale, his system, his particular genius for finding the pressure point in any structure and applying exactly enough force to make the structure accommodate him. He arrives with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire and a monologue that is genuinely, uncomfortably, entertainingly good, and he proceeds to dismantle, in approximately 20 minutes, something the show has spent several seasons constructing. But the conversation I want to spend time with isn't the lineup itself. It's the RV. After Glenn and Abraham are dead, Negan takes Rick into the RV. Just the two of them. And what Negan does in that scene, over the course of a sequence that is one of the most demanding things the show ever asked of its lead, is look for the bottom. He's not torturing Rick in the ordinary sense. He's conducting a specific kind of investigation. He wants to know where Rick ends. He wants to find the place at which all the Ark's construction, the competence, the authority, the accumulated certainty of a man who has crossed every threshold the world placed in front of him, gives way to something more basic, something he can use. The open door in this scene is closed. That's the staging. The RV door is shut. The world outside is full of Negan's people. The tactical Rick, the one who always finds the angle, always locates the exit, has no exit here. And the scene forces him to sit inside that fact for long enough that it stops feeling temporary. Negan sees Rick clearly, maybe more clearly than anyone who loves Rick is able to see him, because love adjusts for the person inside it, and Negan has no adjustment. He sees the structure of Rick's belief, the specific architecture of a man whose entire identity is organised around protecting the people behind him. And he uses it as the weapon. He puts Carl in the position of being the price, and Rick, who has never flinched at what the world required of him when the world's requirement was directed at himself, falls apart when the requirement is directed at his son. Did Negan understand Rick's real fight better than Rick did? I keep returning to this question because the answer the archive suggests is uncomfortable. Negan's system is built on the understanding that people's capacities for resistance are directly connected to what they're protecting. Remove what they're protecting, or threaten it sufficiently, and the resistance becomes negotiable. He applies this to every community he encounters. It works with terrible consistency. But here's the reframe I want to offer. From Negan's perspective, the RV scene might not have been cruelty for its own sake. It might have been, in the logic Negan operates in, the most honest thing anyone had done to Rick in seasons. Negan found the bottom. Negan showed Rick the bottom. And in showing him the bottom, Negan gave Rick something that all the earlier crossings, all the Grimes face arithmetic, had never quite provided. A clear view of what he was actually made of at the level below the performance of leadership. What Rick is made of, at the bottom, is a father who will not bring the axe down on his son. That's the non-negotiable. That's the door that doesn't close. Everything else, the competence, the authority, the accumulated capability, can be stripped away, and what remains is that specific refusal. Negan called it good enough. He was probably right tactically, but he may have made a mistake that the show's subsequent seasons work through carefully. He showed Rick the bottom, and Rick found out what was there, and the knowledge of it, the specific certainty of what couldn't be taken, eventually became the thing Rick rebuilt everything else around. From Negan's perspective, in the RV, a man broken into usefulness. From Rick's perspective, processing it later, a man who discovered, at the worst possible moment, exactly which door he'd never let close. The show holds both readings open. As it should. Michonne Hawthorne arrives in Season 3 with 2 armless, jawless walkers on chains and a katana. She's clearly been using long enough that it's become an extension of her movement rather than a tool she has to think about using. She walks out of fog. She doesn't announce herself. She provides help that wasn't asked for, and then stands at a distance that communicates with complete clarity that she has no interest in rushing the question of trust. Rick doesn't trust her immediately. The show earns this. It doesn't frame Rick's caution as a flaw or as evidence that he's become too hardened to recognize something good. It frames it as exactly what it is: the reasonable response of a man who has learned, through specific and expensive experience, that his initial assessments of people are not always accurate, and that the cost of an inaccurate assessment in this world is paid by people he loves. He watches Michonne. He listens to what she says and what she doesn't say. He takes time that the show doesn't compress away, and the relationship that develops between them across seasons 3 and 4 has the specific texture of something built slowly on materials that were tested before they were used. The open door here is one Michonne walks through and doesn't close behind her. That's the distinction I want to draw carefully, because it matters for understanding what she represents in the arc's architecture. Other people in Rick's life have entered and stayed until they couldn't, until the world took them, or until the specific configuration of their relationship with Rick became something neither of them could hold any longer. Michonne enters, doesn't close the door, and stays through everything, through the losses that follow, through the versions of Rick that emerge from each loss and the adjustments required to remain in relationship with each new version. She stays. Here's what I think the archive is showing with Michonne's role in Rick's arc. She is the only person who consistently meets him where he actually is, rather than where he's trying to get to. Everyone else in Rick's life is organised, in one way or another, around the destination, around the future version of the world Rick is building, the door he's moving toward, the place he'll reach when the current work is done. Carl was the reason for the destination. Daryl is the man Rick most trusts to help reach it. Herschel was the person who reminded Rick that the destination needed to have certain qualities to be worth reaching. Michonne doesn't engage primarily with the destination. She engages with Rick, the person, in the present tense of whatever they're inside. She sees him without the leadership performance, without the narration he provides for others about where the door is and why it's worth walking toward. She is, in a very specific sense, the person in his life most capable of seeing the closed doors alongside the open ones, the losses alongside the forward motion. And staying anyway, what does it mean that the person who kept the door open for Rick was the one who had already made her peace with the old world being gone? Michonne's arc before she arrives in the show's timeline is one of loss and adaptation that she has, by the time we meet her, already substantially completed. She is not in the process of grieving the before world. She has grieved it. She is living in what came after, with the tools that living required her to build, and she meets Rick, who is, in the middle seasons, still processing, still running the arithmetic, still maintaining the narration, from the position of someone who has already been to the destination he's walking toward and come back from it and decided it's habitable. Maybe that's what he needed. Not someone who shared his forward motion, but someone who had already arrived at the place the forward motion was aimed at and could confirm, from experience, that a person could survive being there. The door Michonne holds open isn't the next community or the next threshold of safety. It's something more personal. The door to the possibility that Rick, specifically, might come through all of this and still be someone, still be present, still be reachable. That door held through everything, and the holding of it is what makes the bridge possible. The archive has a pattern for communities in Rick's arc that I want to lay out carefully, because I think it's more specific than the way it usually gets discussed. People tend to say Rick's communities get destroyed. That's true, but it's not the precise observation. The precise observation is this. Every community Rick enters is already heading toward a reckoning of some kind before he arrives, and Rick's presence, his leadership, his specific way of assessing threats and making decisions, accelerates the reckoning without causing it. Herschel's farm was always going to be found. The logic of the world the show builds, the walkers, the other survivor groups, the simple arithmetic of a fixed location in an increasingly dangerous landscape, made the farm's longevity a matter of time, rather than a question. Rick's arrival didn't cause the farm to be found. It found the farm already housing walkers in a barn, already carrying the weight of a man trying to hold on to a belief the world had stopped supporting, already living inside a borrowed time it hadn't fully acknowledged. Rick's presence brought the reckoning into focus, made it arrive on a particular timetable. But the door was always going to close. The prison is the most instructive case. Rick sees the prison as a door, a literal structure with walls and gates and defensibility, a place that could be made safe in the way the farm couldn't, a threshold between the people he's protecting and the world trying to reach them. He commits to it with the specific intensity of a man who has been looking for this kind of door since the world ended and believes he's finally found one that can hold. He is right about the prison's potential and wrong about its permanence. The governor closes that door, violently and deliberately, as an act of choice rather than inevitability. But even then, even granting the governor's agency in the closing, the prison was always going to be found by something. The door was always going to require defending in ways that would eventually exceed the group's capacity. Alexandria was Deanna Monroe's door before it was Rick's. She built it. She chose the location, organised the construction, recruited the residents, maintained the community through the early years of the apocalypse with a combination of pragmatism and genuine moral seriousness that the show treats with respect. Rick walks through the Alexandria gate, and what he walks into is someone else's sustained act of hope, still standing, still running, still functioning. The open door isn't his to claim. It's one he was invited through. What Rick does with it, and what it eventually cost, is the evidence spiral we're moving through. He sees the vulnerabilities Deanna can't fully see, not because she's naive, but because she doesn't have the specific knowledge that comes from living outside the walls for as long as Rick has. He makes decisions accordingly, and the community survives things it might not have survived without him, and is shaped by his presence in ways that transform it into something neither Deanna built nor Rick would have built alone. The open door motif is shifting here. Early in the arc, the open door is what Rick moves toward, the next threshold, the next community, the next attempt at the place Carl described. In the Alexandria section of the arc, the door starts becoming something Rick stands inside rather than moves toward. He's not just passing through, he's trying to hold it open, to maintain the threshold against the pressure of a world that keeps pushing against it. Was Rick a builder or a catalyst? Can those be the same thing? I think the archive's answer is they have to be. The communities Rick enters aren't destroyed by his presence. They're completed by it. The reckoning they were always moving toward arrives in a form that his presence shapes, and the shape it takes is survivable in ways it might not have been without him. The farm gives the group time and knowledge they need for what comes next. The prison gives them a model of organised community they'll carry into Alexandria. Alexandria eventually becomes the foundation of the coalition that survives the Saviours. The door closes. The people who walk through it carry what it gave them into the next one. There's a bridge at the end of this thread, a door Rick builds across water between separated communities at extraordinary cost. File it away. There's something in the show's three major antagonists, the Governor, Negan, and Alpha, that the archive keeps surfacing as a pattern I want to name directly. Each of them is a version of the answer to the question Rick's arc refuses to stop asking. And the question, I've come to think, is this: can the door stay open? The Governor's answer is no. Philip Blake has decided, through a specific sequence of losses and the specific way those losses broke what was breakable in him, that the door to the world Rick is trying to build cannot stay open. That community is always one bad day away from dissolution, that the only defensible position is the kind of control that prevents bad days through force, and that hope as a governing principle is a liability that gets people killed. He's not wrong about the facts his conclusion is based on. He's wrong about what to do with them. His answer closes every door it touches. Herschel, the prison, the possibility of the negotiated coexistence Rick offered in Season 4. Not because the governor is simply evil, but because he has made a philosophical commitment to doors being closed and acts with consistency from that commitment. Negan's answer is different and more interesting. Negan believes the door can stay open, but only if he controls who has access to it, and on what terms, and at what price. His system is, in a darkly practical sense, a theory of maintained community. The saviors and their tributary communities represent a network of relationships that keep more people alive than would survive independently. The door is open, it's just got a very specific kind of lock, and the key is compliance. Rick's arc against Negan is not a fight between someone who believes in open doors and someone who believes in closed ones. It's a fight about who gets to determine the terms of access. Alpha and the Whisperers represent the furthest position. The door doesn't exist. There is no threshold between the human world and the world the walkers inhabit, because they've decided to stop maintaining the distinction. The Whisperers have dissolved the door entirely, not through force, not through control, but through the philosophical decision that the frame of reference that makes doors meaningful is itself an illusion that costs more than it provides. Which antagonist came closest to making Rick stop believing? The archive's answer, I think, is Negan, not during the war but afterward, because the war's aftermath creates a version of the world that Carl described. At real cost, and what Rick finds on the other side of the victory is not the open door Carl's letter pointed toward, but a complicated, fractious, expensive coalition that still isn't what Carl meant. The door is there, it's just harder to keep open than the letter suggested it would be. Glenn's death closes something in Season 7 that the show never fully reopens. Glenn Rhee was Rick's first friend after the hospital. The voice on the tank radio, the first person who answered when Rick called. His presence across the series represents a specific kind of door. The possibility of connection formed quickly, under pressure, and maintained through everything. His absence removes something from the architecture of Rick's belief that the subsequent seasons work around rather than replace. The door that closes when Glenn dies is not just the door of a specific relationship. It's something about the kind of world where a connection like that was possible. The kind of world that could produce a Glenn and keep him. What Rick doesn't say, after Glenn's death, in the immediate aftermath, in the Season 7 episode that stages the aftermath of the lineup, is the most significant silence in the arc. He's not performing composure. He's not leading. He's just not speaking. The absence of words in that space carries more weight than most of the speeches Rick has given across the preceding seasons. The door that moment closes doesn't reopen. The Rick who emerges from Season 7 is working from a different foundation than the Rick who entered it. What he builds on that foundation is what the next chapter is about. There's something in Season 8, Episode 9 that the show hid in plain sight, and I want to approach it carefully because the easy reading, the tragic reading, the reading that treats Carl's death as narrative rupture, misses what I think the archive is actually showing. Carl is bitten in the mid-season finale. He dies in the season's 9th episode. He dies having had enough time to write the letters, to say the goodbyes, to make the specific request. That is the emotional centre of his arc, and I'd argue, the emotional centre of Rick's entire story. The easy reading: Carl's death is a tragedy that derails the arc and changes everything. The show loses its moral compass when it loses the character who embodied the destination. The reading the archive keeps giving me: Carl's death isn't a derailment. It's the arc arriving at its destination early, in the only form the world was going to allow it to arrive. Carl was the door Rick was walking toward, not as a symbol or a representation, but literally. The future Rick was building was the future Carl would inhabit. The open door was the one at the end of the road that led to Carl's world. When Carl dies, that door closes, and what the show does with the closing is what I think is most significant. Rick breaks down in Season 8 in a way the show hasn't allowed since Laurie. The breakdown is staged with the same economy as the Laurie breakdown. Not theatrical, not extended for dramatic effect, but the specific quality of a person who's been maintaining the forward motion through everything and has arrived at the thing that stops the motion. He's not moving toward a door when Carl dies. He is for the first time in a long time still. And then Carl's letter, the request. Be the man I know you can be. Not the man you've had to become, the man I know you can be. Carl's dying insistence that the arc has another stage available, that the transformation isn't complete, that somewhere inside the man who's been doing what the world required is still the person who could choose something different. Did Carl's death change Rick's destination? Or did it remove the reason he could name for going there? My guess, and it's a guess, framed as carefully as I can frame it, is that the two things happened simultaneously, and the relationship between them is what drives everything in Season 9. The named reason is gone, the destination is transformed, and what Rick is left with is the request Carl made, and the question of whether he's capable of honouring it, and the specific cost of trying. The bridge is the answer. It has to be. The bridge is the only form Carl's future takes in the world the show built. Not the future as Carl described it. A community where Negan lives, and people build things, and the old world's values are somehow recovered and maintained. The bridge is the scaled-down, survivable, actually achievable version of that future. A door built across water, connecting the separated. A threshold maintained by Rick's specific combination of will and capability, and the request Carl left behind him. The door Rick has been walking toward, transformed by Carl's death into a door he builds with his hands, and then, when the calculation requires it, destroys to save the people on the other side. I keep coming back to the staging of the bridge arc in Season 9. Rick is more at peace in these episodes than in almost any previous stretch of the show. Not happy. The costs are visible. The fractures in the coalition are visible. The difficulty of the thing Carl asked for is visible. But something has settled. The door he's walking toward and the door he's building have become the same door. And there's something quiet and almost restful about a man who has found the thing his fighting was for and is doing it. The arc was always heading here. Carl's letter didn't change the direction. It clarified it. The bridge in Season 9 is the most literal open door in the series, and I want to spend some time with exactly what it is before we talk about what it means. Rick is leading the construction of a bridge, a physical structure built across a river, designed to connect the separated communities of the coalition: Alexandria, the hilltop, the kingdom, the sanctuary, in a way that makes cooperation not just possible but practically accessible. The bridge is not defensive infrastructure. It's connective infrastructure. It's the material form of the argument that these communities are better joined than separated, that the open door between them is worth the labour and the resources and the ongoing negotiation of the relationships it creates. He manages it with the specific combination of capabilities the arc has built: the tactical precision, the reading of people, the ability to hold a coalition together through the friction of competing priorities and histories. He's using everything the arc gave him, every hard lesson, every crossing, every piece of Grimes' face arithmetic, in service of what Carl asked for. The man the world made him into is building the door Carl described. What we saw, the bridge arc, is also the arc of Rick managing the deep fractures in the post-war coalition. Daryl is angry, Maggie is grieving Glenn and processing the question of whether Negan's imprisonment represents justice or an insult to Glenn's memory. The communities that fought together are discovering that the peace is harder than the war in specific and unexpected ways. Rick is the person holding this together, and the holding is visible as labour. Not effortless, not performed as if it cost nothing. What it might mean, the bridge is Rick's answer to the entire arc's central question. Rick Grimes versus the world is not resolved by Rick defeating the world, by winning the war against the saviours, by eliminating each antagonist, by surviving everything the show sends toward him. It's resolved by Rick choosing to stop fighting the world and become instead the threshold, the open door. Not the person who walks through doors toward the next destination, but the structure that makes the walking possible for everyone else. He becomes the bridge, and then he destroys it. The herd comes. The bridge isn't finished. The communities are on one side of the river. The herd is coming from the other side. And Rick is standing at the centre of a structure that is simultaneously the thing Carl asked for and the means of everyone he loves surviving the next 20 minutes. He does the calculation. He fires the shot that detonates the dynamite. The bridge goes, the herd goes with it. From the herd's perspective, this is the thought experiment the show seems to invite. There is no bridge. There's an obstacle and a sound, and a man standing at the centre of it, who is neither moving toward nor away, who has stopped finally at the threshold and become it. Rick Grimes versus the world. The answer is that he stops fighting and opens himself to being the door. The victory, if it's a victory, is not over the world. It's within it. The door stays open because someone stood at the centre of it and held it open at the exact cost required. The CRM helicopter is there. It takes him. He doesn't die on the bridge. The story continues and continues invisibly for years. In captivity, we don't fully understand until the ones who live provide some of it. But the bridge is the answer. Was the bridge sacrificed the moment Rick finally won? I keep sitting with both sides of that question. Won what exactly? Against whom? The world didn't lose. The herd was one herd among thousands. The coalition survived, but not as Rick had organised it. The door he built was destroyed in the act of being used. And yet, the people on the other side of the river are alive. The door held long enough. The cost ledger in Rick's arc, when you open it in the archive, is a specific and heavy thing. Laurie. She dies in the prison in the act of giving Rick's daughter life. And what she takes with her is the last person who knew the before Rick in continuous relationship. The person who remembered the man before the arc began and carried that memory alongside him through everything. Herschel. He dies at the governor's hands in the Season 4 mid-season finale. And what his death removes from the architecture of Rick's arc is harder to name precisely but unmistakable. The moral clarity of a man who had found a way to maintain genuine faith in people without being naive about what people are capable of. The door Herschel kept open was the one marked forgiveness, and his death closes it with a specific finality. Glenn. He dies in the Season 7 premiere, and the door his death closes is the one I identified earlier. The possibility of the kind of connection that formed between him and Rick in the first episode quickly and completely, and under the worst possible circumstances. Glenn was the first voice that answered when Rick called. His absence is also the absence of that possibility. Abraham. He dies in the same episode, and what Abraham carried for Rick, the specific kind of loyalty that comes from a person who has chosen you not through shared history, but through present assessment, who decided this person is worth following, and made that decision with open eyes, goes with him. Carl, the reason the door existed at all for a long time, the destination that organised the forward motion, the person whose letter, written in the act of dying, transformed the arc's destination rather than erased it. The open door in this chapter is the one these people walked through and didn't walk back out of. Not a threshold of hope or arrival, a threshold of loss, of absence, of the specific shape that Rick's life takes after each departure. Can we know if Rick understood, consciously, what proximity to him cost the people he loved? The archive doesn't fully answer this. There are moments. The prison phone calls to the dead, the specific quality of Rick's bearing after Glenn's death, the way the bridge arc reads as a man trying to build something worthy of all the receipts, that suggest he carried the cost with full awareness, that the column was always in view, that the Grimes face arithmetic included this ledger as well as the more immediately tactical ones. Is Rick defined by what he saved or by what he lost trying? The question doesn't resolve. The show doesn't resolve it. Both lists are long, and both are real, and the relationship between them is what makes Rick's arc genuinely tragic in the classical sense. Not because it ends badly, but because the cost and the accomplishment are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. The door stayed open because of everything that was paid to keep it open, and the payment was these specific people, and the door would not have stayed open without them, and they would have wanted it to stay open, and none of that makes the ledger balance. What Rick doesn't say when he counts the names is the weight that hangs in the space after each one. Not explanation, not justification, just the pause between one name and the next. The silence of a man who has added each one to the column and continues the arithmetic because stopping would mean something he can't afford to let it mean. Daryl is still here. Carol is still here. Michonne found Rick. Judith carries his legacy into the franchise's future. The door stayed open. People walked through it. The list of names is still the list of names. The Ones Who Live gives us Rick and Michonne years after the bridge. Years of separation, of captivity for Rick, of searching for Michonne, of Judith growing up with Judith's hat and a sword, and the legacy of two people who loved each other across an impossible distance and didn't stop. The Rick of The Ones Who Live is not simply the continuation of the Rick the original series built. He has survived things we can only partly know. Years inside the CRM, an organisation that is vast and militarised, and specifically built around the proposition that the kind of door Rick spent his arc trying to keep open is a luxury that civilization's reconstruction cannot afford. The CRM's logic is, in many ways, the governor's logic scaled up. Security through control, survival through managed access, the door open only to those who serve the machine's definition of who deserves passage. Rick tried to escape multiple times, if The Ones Who Live staging's honest about what it's showing. He tried to escape and couldn't, and eventually, this is the reading the show provides, carefully framed as uncertain, began to function within the CRM structure in a way that looks, from outside, like accommodation but is possibly something more like the longest-running version of the post-Negan compliance. Waiting. Building towards something from inside the constraint. And then Michonne finds him, And the thing she finds is not the CRM's version of Rick Grimes, not the machine's asset, not the man shaped by years into the CRM's purposes. What she finds is still recognisably him, still someone. The door Michonne held open across the years of separation, the door she crossed a landscape to reach, opens onto a person who can still walk through it. Both readings of what the ones who live means for the arc deserve space. Reading 1. Rick 1. He kept the door open across everything. The losses, the crossings, the years inside the CRM, and walked through it on the other side. Michonne is the door, and he found it, and the victory is real, earned at real cost, and the cost was worth it, because the door was real. Reading 2. Winning cost him everything it was possible to lose, except Michonne and the children. The years inside the CRM are years of his life he didn't spend building the world Carl described. The separation from Judith and RJ is the specific cost of the bridge sacrifice compounded by the CRM's refusal to let him go. The winning is fragile and expensive, and the world is still burning. And the door that's open is smaller than the one Rick spent his arc trying to build. Both readings are true. The show holds both because both are honest. Is Rick's victory that he survived, or that he chose, at the end, to stop letting the world define what was worth surviving for? I think the answer the archive keeps giving me is the second, the choice he makes in the ones who live. Choosing Michonne, choosing the door that leads back to his children, choosing the smaller and more personal threshold over the CRM's larger machine, is the bridge sacrifice in another form. The world offers him one kind of open door. He chooses a different one, the one that was always, in some deep sense, what he was walking toward. The hospital door is somewhere in this, still open somewhere in the archive, still the image the whole arc grew from. We're back at the beginning. A hospital room. A door standing open in the background of a scene most people scroll past. Light through it, from a corridor that leads to a world nobody expected and nobody was ready for. Nobody closed it. Nobody thought to. The world ended and the door stayed open, and Rick Grimes walked through it into everything this franchise became. The transformation the motif has undergone across 13 chapters is the whole story in miniature. In the first episode, the open door is background detail, set dressing, something that fills the frame while the important things happen in the foreground. By Atlanta, it's the world Rick walks into, a city that looks intact from the air and is catastrophically open at street level. All its presumed structure dissolved into the particular silence of a place that used to close its doors at night and no longer has anything that needs protecting. By the farm, the prison, Alexandria, it's the threshold Rick moves toward and tries to hold. The next community, the next attempt at the world Carl described. The door worth keeping open. And then it shifts. The bridge is where the shift is complete. The open door is no longer something Rick walks toward. Rick becomes the threshold. He stands at the center of the structure he built, and he becomes the open door between the people he loves and the thing trying to reach them. And the cost of being the door is the bridge and the years inside the CRM and the separation from Judith and RJ and every other price on the ledger we read through in the last chapter. The show never resolves whether Rick was right, whether the door was worth keeping open, whether the arc's final accounting, weighing the cost against the access it purchased, lands on the side of meaning or on the side of what it cost. That question stays open, deliberately, because the show understands that closing it would be dishonest. The door is still open. The franchise continues. Judith carries the legacy forward. Daryl is in France still moving. Carol is somewhere still choosing. The world Carl described is still not built and still being reached toward. What if the whole fight, every villain, every crossing, every price on the ledger, was just a man trying to make sure the door stayed open for the people who'd need it after him? Not to win, not to defeat the world, just to hold the threshold long enough that the next person and the one after that and the one after that could still walk through it. I don't know if that's what the show intended. The archive gives me the pattern, but not the intent. And the intent may not be the point anyway. The pattern is real. The open doors are in the frames. Rick kept walking through them and leaving them open behind him, not looking back, because the door behind was already handled, and the door ahead was the one that needed his attention. And somewhere, in whatever version of the franchise's future comes next, there's a door standing open in the background of a scene most people will scroll straight past. The light coming through it from somewhere the camera isn't showing. Nobody closing it. Nobody needing to. Rick Grimes walked through it. Whatever comes next walks through it after him. The door is still open.